Hello everyone, welcome back to Conway Video. I wanted to do a video on a topic that's kind of been in my mind lately. A few different things have happened that have made me think about this, and this is the idea of the 80-20 rule and how it can apply to, I think, the world of software development. So the 80-20 rule, I guess in the kind of colloquial kind of meaning or definition, I take it to mean the idea that sometimes it's the 20% of something that matters, or a lot of the time actually it's the 20% of something that matters, and the other 80% actually isn't really that important. It's that small 20%. And this applies in all kinds of areas of life. So for example, um, maybe you spend a lot of time preparing to go to gym and then, getting into gym and then warming up and stretching. But at the end of the day, you only spend about 20% of all that time actually exercising at full capacity. But it's that 20% that's the valuable part. Everything else is just preparation. But that 20% of the actual exercise that you do where you're, huffing and puffing and sweating, that's when you really get, your body gets a good workout. Or maybe in investing, for example, you invest in an index fund, you invest in the stock market, and the stock market goes up and down, and companies go up and companies go down. But you kind of hope that over time that the value of the index fund keeps going up, and that's because there's a small number of companies, and maybe it's only 20% of the companies in the index, but that small number of companies, they are so successful that they carry the whole thing up. Now, I think the way that this works in software development, it can play out in different ways, but um, I think one example recently I had in my own career was that I was looking at optimizing the performance of a website that was running a bit slowly. And I ended up spending a fair amount of time trying out different things and going down different rabbit holes. And eventually I managed to get to the point of making a few changes, and the team also made changes. And we eventually got to the point that the site was quite a bit faster. But it was interesting to notice that the amount of changes that actually caused the site to be faster were very small. It was actually a relatively small number of code changes. It was even on the order of maybe like 50 to 100 lines of code that had to change. 50 to 100 lines of code isn't very much in most software development solutions, especially this one that was like thousands of lines long. And so it's just interesting for me to see that such a small number of changes actually resulted in the bulk of the improvement. And I think that this kind of can play out in a lot of different aspects of our day-to-day lives, whether we're doing software development or other professions. But in software development, I found that you can spend a lot of time doing things that are non-essential. Actually, I found this happens with entrepreneurship as well, like if you're trying to build or launch your own product or other things that people do. But I think software development, this definitely happens. You can, if you actually notice, at the end of a workday, what did you spend time on? What were you doing throughout the day? What was taking up most of your time? Sometimes you find that actually you're spending an enormous amount of time on things that made very little difference to your job and your ability to execute on your project, and your ability to move forward, your ability to do well at the job, to impress management, to impress your coworkers, to actually like maybe get that pay rise or that promotion, or to finish that project. And so I think it can be good to sometimes remind ourselves. I try to remind myself that um, sometimes I'm spending a lot of time on a small number of things or on a lot of things, and they're not really that important. And if I can remember that, then the next time I go and start to work, I'll start to think, hang on, I don't have to do that. This meeting I don't have to do, or this set of tasks is so low value, I might as well kind of deprioritize it or postpone it till later. Or I'll think, all these changes I'm trying to make to this code to improve it, most of them aren't actually really going to affect anything very much. It's only this one small change I should focus on in order to really have the impact. I mean, another example is refactoring, for example. If you're refactoring a lot of code, it's a big piece of code and there's a lot of different things that have to change and it's going to take you a long time. Sometimes you want to step back and think, do I actually need to make this change? Like, is anyone even going to look at this code? Is this code going to be modified? A lot of software projects, they actually have large amounts of code that are in use. They're running every day. They're executing on the processor. And yet they don't need to change. Hardly anyone ever looks at them because they're just working. And so no one needs to change them. We just leave them and let them go running. It's just like if you own a car, the engine of the car, mostly, 9 times out of 10, that engine is going to work. So there's no need to dig in and take the engine apart every single time you drive, right? Or even every week or every month or even every 5 or 10 years. You don't need to do that. Like, you know that the engine works, so you can just kind of leave it, let it sit there and do its thing, and you focus on other things that actually do matter, like doing the oil change or changing the tires or replacing the battery. And I think the same can apply to code. You try and do these big refactoring projects and you try and do these big cleanups, and you end up spending a lot of time changing all this code. And it's actually not code that anyone's even going to look at. It's not code that's going to be used by anyone. The computer is going to run it, but there's no need for it to change. So then I guess the question you have to ask is it worth spending time on this? Maybe there are other parts of the code that are more important to refactor because they are parts that are being actively maintained or actively worked on. Other people are going to come in and see that code on a regular basis and have difficulty with it. Or maybe there's some piece of documentation. And again, these could be really small things. It could be like one paragraph at the top of a wiki page that just explains one thing. But as soon as a new person comes into the organization and reads that one paragraph, it's going to clarify so many things for them. And then they won't have to come to you and ask you questions and take up all your time. So you can often look for these things, whether it's documentation, whether it's refactoring of code, whether it's some kind of unit test. You can look for these small changes that actually make a huge difference. I think a lot of really, really excellent work that I've seen in programming can often actually come down to really small changes, really small tweaks that actually don't take very long to do, but add an enormous, tremendous amount of value because they just make that one thing that everyone is struggling with a whole lot easier. And it's the same with the code with things like performance. When something is really slow, you can look for the bottleneck. You can find the bottleneck and then you just fix that one bottleneck and it only takes you 5 minutes and the whole code is faster because of it. And you've got lots of different functions calling into that one little bottleneck. So all you have to do is find that. And so then when I think about this way of kind of focusing on the 80-20 rule, then I start to think about something else, which is analysis. I start to think, hey, maybe it's a good time to really spend some good quality time on analysis before we get dirty with code. So like when we have a new task, when I get a new task to begin working on, or maybe there's a bug that I have to look at or whatever, instead of just jumping straight in to try and fix it, I do want to actually take a step back and spend even 5 minutes, even 10 minutes on analysis. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, not coding, not writing a single line of code, not even diagramming, not even talking to someone, just 5 minutes just sitting there at my desk thinking. It can feel like a lot of time. Have you ever sat at your desk for just 5 minutes and just thought? I mean, it really, really feels like a long time. A lot of us don't kind of naturally do that. But if you make yourself just sit there for 5 minutes, I mean, this is something I definitely want to try, is just sitting there for 5 minutes, really thinking through what I'm trying to do or what the problem is. And those 5 minutes could end up saving me hours because those 5 minutes are where I get to orient myself and go in this direction or that direction. And if I've really thought for 5 minutes about, what part of the code I want to explore, whether this change is really essential, what priority this task or this feature really is, if I've taken that time, then I might end up saving myself from going down a rabbit hole that I really didn't need to go down. I might save myself from spending 2 or 3 hours refactoring that unit test that no one's ever going to look at, or that it doesn't have to be a perfect unit test. It can be a little bit imperfect as long as it basically tests the basic flow of the task. Whatever it is that I'm doing, just to stop every few minutes and ask myself, is this essential? Is this important? Is this that 20% that's going to yield all the value? As developers, I think even more than maybe the code that we write, the thing that's valuable or that we're investing constantly is our time. We're thinking about where to invest our time. So if we can value our time really well and think very strategically and carefully about kind of every hour of the day and think, is this the best way to spend that hour? We can end up leaving work at the end of the day and feeling, I did a whole lot of stuff. And then maybe you didn't even work that many hours. You might have only worked 6 hours or 7 hours or even 5 or 4 hours, but you did the small number of things that really counted. And so you come away thinking, hey, or feeling, I'm productive. I did a great job. This job is going well. I'm going to be able to demonstrate some really good progress to management, to the business. and you can actually back that up because you've been really thinking carefully about that small 20% that counts. So anyway, that's my thoughts about the 80-20 rule as it applies to software development. Thank you for watching.